You ever drive past one of those massive warehouses or factories and just wonder, what does it take to actually buy or sell one of those things? Well, it's way more than just signing some papers. It's a high-stakes game with its own complex set of rules, some serious financial math, and a whole lot of detective work. So today, we're going to pull back that curtain and see what it really takes to trade these industrial giants. Seriously, it's like a giant puzzle, right? You've got zoning laws over here, market forces over there. It's a lot. So let's start putting the pieces together, and we'll begin at the most fundamental level, the ground these buildings stand on. Before anyone even thinks about drawing up plans or, exchanging money, there's a whole set of rules that governs what you can and can't do with a piece of land. You've got to play by the book. And that book, it's called the Municipal Zoning Bylaws and Official Plans. Think of it as the ultimate rule book for the property. These regulations are there to keep things orderly, to make sure a super noisy factory doesn't suddenly appear next to a quiet neighborhood. They're basically the gatekeepers that decide where industrial stuff can happen, what kind of stuff is allowed, and what has to be done to protect the areas around it. This brings us to a really important idea called sensitive land use. It makes sense, right? Zoning laws are basically the peacekeepers here. They make sure a loud 24/7 factory isn't built right next to a school, or a hospital, or a park. These are the places that need to be shielded from all the hustle and bustle of industrial life. So how do you actually keep the peace between a factory and a family home? Well, you do it with something called buffer zones. The best way to think of them is like invisible fences. They create this cushion of empty space that absorbs the noise, the smells, maybe even the vibrations from a plant before any of that can spill over into our neighborhoods.
Okay, so you found a piece of land, it's zoned correctly, it's got a buffer zone, great. Now comes the big one. This is the question that literally determines how much the property is worth. How much of it can you actually build on?
And this brings us to a term that can absolutely make or break a deal: buildable percentage. See, it's not about the total size of the lot you see on a map. Not at all. It's about how much of it you're legally allowed to use. Zoning rules force you to leave space around the edges. Those are called setbacks. And the area left in the middle, that's your buildable area. That number is pretty much the holy grail when it comes to valuing industrial land. All right, let's make this real. Imagine an investor is looking at a 2.5-acre lot. They check the local bylaws, and it says they can only cover 35% of that land with their building. So how much space are they really getting for their money? Okay, first things first, we've got to get our units straight. We need to turn those acres into square feet. So 1 acre is 43,560 square feet. Multiply that by 2.5, and you get 108,900 square feet. Then you just apply that all-important buildable percentage from the bylaw, which in this case is 35%. And voila, there's your number, 38,115 square feet. So you see, the investor isn't buying over 100,000 square feet of land. Nope, they're buying just over 38,000 square feet of buildable land, and that is the number that drives the price tag. So we've nailed down the rules for the land itself, but that's really only half the story. A property's value is also a bit of a ship on the ocean, totally at the mercy of bigger economic forces. Just take interest rates. It's a classic seesaw. When interest rates go up, it gets super expensive to borrow money, so the whole market just cools down. But when rates drop, it's like a green light for investors. Borrowing is cheap, demand heats up, and property prices can go through the roof. And it's not just about interest rates, not by a long shot. Buyers and sellers are constantly watching what the government's doing with taxes and environmental rules. How close is the property to highways, railways, or ports? That's huge. Is there a good local workforce with the right skills? You bet that matters. And of course, it all boils down to the timeless laws of supply and demand. Okay, let's flip the script for a second. Let's look at this from the seller's point of view. They've basically got two big goals: get the absolute best price they can for their property, and do it without getting into any legal hot water. A smart seller knows that some small upgrades can make a huge difference. You've got a warehouse with super high ceilings? Add a mezzanine. That's like creating a whole new floor of usable space. Beefing up the electrical system can be a total game changer for a modern manufacturer. Even simple stuff like adding parking, a new fence, or just a fresh coat of paint can seriously boost that final sale price. But it's not all about making things look good. Sellers have a massive legal duty, and it's called disclosure. If there's ever been an environmental issue on the property, like a chemical spill, they have to tell potential buyers. Trying to hide something like that, it's just a recipe for a legal and financial disaster down the road. Now, here's a pretty slick move you see all the time in the industrial world, the sale-leaseback. It works like this. A company sells its own factory to an investor, getting a big pile of cash, but then they immediately sign a lease to rent that same factory right back. They free up a ton of capital without ever having to move their business. The new owner gets a tenant on day one. It's a classic win-win situation. And that brings us to our final stop, the buyer's perspective. For any buyer, there's a two-word phrase that is everything: due diligence. Their job is basically to become a detective and investigate every single thing about that property before they sign that final contract. Now, there are really two main types of buyers. First, you've got your investors. These folks are all about the numbers. They want a reliable, long-term tenant who pays the rent on time. Then you've got your users. These are the companies buying the building for their own business. They're the ones walking around with a tape measure, checking ceiling heights, counting loading doors. For them, it's all about whether the building is a perfect fit for what they do. But no matter what kind of buyer you are, this due diligence process is absolutely non-negotiable. You're digging through all the financial docs, like income statements and any existing leases. You're doing a deep legal dive to make sure the property title is clean and that it actually follows all the zoning rules. And of course, you're bringing in inspectors to check the building's physical condition and to run environmental tests to make sure the land isn't contaminated. You leave no stone unturned. So there you have it. Buying and selling industrial real estate is this amazing mix of hard numbers, strict rules, and reading the market. It's a world where a single percentage point can be worth millions, and one tiny misdetail could spell disaster. But for those who can navigate all that complexity, the opportunities are just as massive as the buildings themselves. So the real question is, knowing what goes into it, where do you see the opportunity?